Hello everyone. Welcome back to another Commander review for Magic the Gathering. Today, we are talking about Yosei, the Morning Star from Champions of Kamigawa. Now, this is a legendary dragon spirit. It's a 5/5. It has a mana value of 6 for generic and 2 white. It has the flying keyword, and it has a triggered ability. When Yosei, the Morning Star dies, target player skips his or her next untap step. Tap up to 5 target permanents that player controls. So, really powerful card, and really unique in comparison to the dragon spirits of this set. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. I think this is the least popular among the dragons, and I don't know why, because this is an absurd ability, especially in a 1v1 format. Absolutely absurd. In Commander, it's not going to be as absurd, but it's definitely going to be like debilitating to any one player, unless we have ways to break it, which we are definitely going to. And then it's going to destroy the entire board state, and everyone's gonna hate you, and I love it so much. I gotta get my mouse in. There we go. Okay, so some rulings for this commander, and I will move my face when we get to this bottom one. If any of the targets of Yosei's ability are illegal, they won't be tapped. That essentially falls under any targeting rules ability. Like if someone gives something hexproof, then obviously the spell you use to target it won't be effective anymore, and therefore making it illegal. So it just essentially counters it. It makes it null and void. And for certain things like hexproof, when Yosei's ability triggers, if it had hexproof or ward or something on it prior, and you weren't able to meet the requirement to pay the ward, for example, you wouldn't be able to really target it in the first place. Ward, you can target it, but it does counter. But if it has hexproof, you won't be able to target it from the get-go. Second rule: if all of the permanents targeted by Yosei's ability become illegal targets, nothing becomes tapped, but the target player still skips their untap step. So, if you target the player, and then they cast something that phases out their board state, like Teferi's Protection or something like that. Teferi's Protection would not be a good one, because that'll fall under the third rule. If they cast something, I don't remember what it's called, but there's a white instant that phases out the whole table, essentially, of their stuff. Or they have a blue spell that gives all their creatures hexproof. They cannot be targeted, so it counters all of the tapping shenanigans, but you still can target the player, so they still skip their untap step, because there's at least one target that still is valid from Yosei's ability. The ability still resolves, you just won't get the benefits from tapping the creatures, but you'll still skip the untap step. The inverse of that is also true with the third rule. If the player becomes an illegal target, the target permanents are tapped, but the player doesn't skip their untap step. So if they have something that gives them hexproof or protection or something like that, they can't be the target of spells or abilities this turn. But you still have legal targets on the creatures. Yosei's ability still resolves, because there are still legal targets. Just the illegal targets are null and void and essentially countered. And then, just to follow that third rule up, if someone were to cast something like Teferi's Protection, where they do gain protection from everything, and then their entire board fizzles out and phases out, then yes, all of Yosei's abilities, all of Yosei's targets become null and void, and the entire ability is just countered. If, this is the fourth rule, if a permanent won't untap during its controller's next untap step, that effect waits to apply until its controller has an untap step that isn't skipped. If a permanent won't untap during its controller's next untap... Ah. Gotcha. Gotcha. Let me just make sure I'm reading that right. Dun-dun-dun. Ah. So, I think this is just to clarify the fact that the targeted player skips their untap step. If the opponent won't untap during a controller's next untap step, that effect waits to apply if its controller has an untap step that isn't skipped. Okay, so here's a great example that would make a lot of sense with more modern day Magic. There is stun counters, which are growing in popularity throughout Magic's present history. A stun counter essentially says, if this creature would untap, remove this counter instead. And it's just like a delaying of the untap step. There's plenty of ways to tap down your creatures and prevent them from untapping, but this is kind of one of the easiest ways. Essentially, those triggers, they don't untap during their controller's next untap step. If they would untap, remove the stun counter instead. All of those things require the untap step to exist for that all to trigger and stuff. With Yosei's ability, that player isn't skipping that entire step, so none of those things can ever go on the stack or resolve, essentially, because they require that you go to the untap step in order for them to meet their requirements. So if you skip that untap step, you're essentially stunning them even longer because there is no untap step for them to do anything with. So really cool stuff there. It can get a little confusing, but essentially if something requires an untap step, then Yosei can bypass that and go around it. So making it so those cards, those permanents, those counters are null and void essentially, and they just have to stay there until the next untap step. And then if you skip with Yosei, they have to wait again and again and again, because you're constantly skipping that required step for those triggers to resolve it. And then finally, I'll move my head up here a little bit so you can read the text as I read it along. If more than one effect instructs a player to skip their untap step, such as if Yosei dies more than once in a turn, that player skips that many untap steps. This is different from effects that state that something doesn't untap during an untap step. Wow! I never even thought about utilizing Yosei that way, but that's just bullying at that point. So, I think the best comparison to this is going back to the stun counters. If a permanent has a stun counter, if it would untap, you remove the counter instead. The more stun counters that are put on that permanent, the more upkeeps it has to sit in removing stun counters instead of untapping, right? So with that logic in mind, skipping the untap step as a whole also stacks. Just like you have multiple stun counters, you can skip multiple untap steps, which is absolutely absurd, especially for some of the stuff that we're going to do in this build. You could, because it's 3 players, if this were 1 player and you were somehow able to make multiple copies of Yosei or reanimate it multiple times and sacrifice it multiple times, then you could target that same player over and over and over, and they would never be able to untap ever because there is no untap on their turn. They just have upkeep, draw. Upkeep, draw. That's it. And then they go into main phase 1. So that's really brutal. And in a 4-player format like Commander, generally 4-player, obviously play with as many people at the table as you want, but typically a 4-player, this could be brutal for 1 player. Like, if someone was the archenemy at the table and there was a Yosei player at the table, the Yosei player could just dominate and control the archenemy by attacking with a myriad Yosei and making 2 other attack one player makes 2 other copies, right? They have to do the legend rule. They sacrifice the 2 tokens automatically because of state-based actions. But those tokens are sacrificed due to the legendary rule, so they still count as dying. When they die, those tokens will trigger, and you could target one player with both of those Yosei abilities, making it so one player skips the next 2 Untapped Steps, which is... And you could obviously tap up to 5 things each time, so a total of 10 if they have that many permanents. That's brutal! Yeah, that's actually brutal. Ooh. Insane. So, not only can you skip the upkeep or the untap step like requirements for certain things like stun counters, but you can skip multiple untapped steps, making it really hard for an opponent to really try and like play the game, essentially, because you're time walking them over and over and over again. It's absurd. So really cool stuff. The rules, all in all, are pretty simple and straightforward. Just bear in mind that when it comes down to it, Yosei's ability will still resolve as long as there's at least one legal target that includes the player and the 5 permanents that you're targeting. As long as any of them are still legal, Yosei's ability will resolve on any of the legal targets. If all of the targets become illegal, then Yosei's ability will just fizzle and do nothing. And then secondly, when you are talking about the untap step, you are removing it entirely from that player's next turn. So they can't do any triggered abilities or anything like that during the untap step. Technically, the untap step stuff triggers at the beginning of the upkeep, but they only trigger if you've done the untap step, right? They trigger when something becomes untapped or when something would become untapped. So don't get that confused either. The untap step is not a playable area where you can cast spells and have a stack. It does not interact with the stack in any way. The only thing the untap step does is you untap your permanents in that step, and then you immediately go into upkeep. You have things that trigger from that step, which is why this ability is so crucial, that if you can remove that step, then you're essentially removing any of those triggered abilities in your upkeep step, which is really, really cool. Alright, enough of that. Let's move on. Gift of Immortality. Mono white, really good at protecting creatures and reanimating creatures. Really just good at preventing death in general. So, Gift of Immortality is just a great way to continuously recur your commander for super easy. And honestly, let's see, when enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under its own control at the beginning of the next end step. So this could be a pseudo-infinite combo right here. Gift of Immortality and Yosei, and then a free sack outlet. That's like a white spell, but preferably, or most commonly, it's going to be some sort of artifact that you sacrifice something for free. Once each turn, you'll be able to sacrifice Yosei. It will come back from Gift of Immortality, and then Gift of Immortality will then attach itself to Yosei at the end of that turn. But that means in a 4-turn cycle, you can use Yosei's ability 4 times, which is absurd. You can target everyone once, plus one other major threat at the table of players, and double up that upkeep. It's just absolutely brutal. Bear in mind that the way Gift of Immortality works is when the creature dies, when Yosei dies, Yosei will immediately come back, and Gift of Immortality waits until the end of that turn. So there is a window between the creature reanimating and the enchantment reanimating that your opponents can remove Yosei again. And therefore, if this dies before this comes back, it'll come back trying to attach itself to that creature. The creature won't be there, which will then fizzle Gift of Immortality. So It's a great way to build like a pseudo-infinite engine with Yosei, but bear in mind there is a window of opportunity that they can permanently remove Yosei after getting rid of it the first time. Then again, they have to waste 2 spells just to get rid of Yosei. It's absolutely absurd. Speaking of absurd, the deck that I'm building around for Yosei is a mono-white Spirit and Arcane tribal deck, where it's going to be pretty much anything. If you played Standard back in this era, which was many years ago, at least 20 years ago, something like that, 20-ish years ago, I think, was when this set came out. So if you played back then, and you know what I'm talking about as far as Spirit and Arcane Tribal, this is that deck. But it's all mono white, and it's going to have new spirits, and it's going to pretty much use anything that can use Arcane or has Splice into Arcane. But it's going to be a lot of fun, and just play as many spirits as I can. Almost like a Spell Slinger, but with Spirit Tribal. A popular deck idea on EDH Rec. As I mentioned earlier, white is really good at reanimating things and getting things into play. And then, of course, you want free sack outlets so you can use Yosei's ability over and over and over again, and then reanimate it and sacrifice it. And it can become very oppressive if you play, not only if you build it right, but if you play it right, this commander can be really oppressive to the table and really an absurd mono-white control commander. Like, whew, if I didn't have already up to 10 commanders in my control deck, which I can get into my crazy deck building logic in a different video, but if I didn't already have that one, like, full roster of control commanders, this would be an insane control commander. And then lastly, like all the dragons, the spirit dragons from this set, we gotta make as many tokens as we can with Yosei, so we can trigger that ability as much as we can. So giving it Myriad is probably the easiest way to do this. Create those tokens whenever it attacks, immediately sacrifice those tokens because of the legendary rule, and then you get to tap down blockers if you have blockers in your way, and of course you are skipping upkeeps on those players. So again, very controlling, very oppressive. Of all of the dragons, this is probably the most oppressive, because if you think about it, the black one is cool, and it's very popular. It's a great finisher card in a lot of black decks, because you're draining life and stealing life. The green deck is just a big powerhouse. It's just a beefy beater. The blue one is, I think, surprisingly more commonly referred to as the oppressive one, because when it dies, you're stealing your opponent's stuff, and people do not like their stuff being stolen. And the red one is probably the weakest because it's a burn board wipe, but it only burns non-flying creatures, and it only does like 5 damage to everything, so it's not a lot of damage, but it's still good. This one literally removes a step of the player's next turn away from them. They are no longer able to play the game. When you use this ability appropriately and properly, your opponents will not be able to play the game. Like, the blue one is oppressive because you're stealing their stuff, but the white one just stops them from playing. And that's absurdly powerful. So be mindful if you played this commander, and if you played this deck idea, this is probably the most brutal and oppressive of the spirit dragons. Really cool stuff. And that is going to be it for Yosei. Bear in mind, like I said earlier, this is going to be a huge threat at the table. It's going to have a giant target on its back the moment it comes into play. If your opponents know what you're doing, it's absolutely absurd. And it's a mono-white turn skip, which usually you would see that kind of effect in blue, but it does fit because mono-white is a control color, but it just does it in such an absurdly powerful level. It's absolutely crazy. It is a very popular commander to build around. There's a lot of deck ideas on EDH Rec for this commander, so it has the ranking of S, because there was at least 10 or more deck ideas that I could find or make for this commander. Really cool stuff, and yeah, this is the last of the dragons for this set, and I really think that this is the most powerful and the most absurdly crazy of the dragons. It's really, really cool what it can do. So let me know in the comments below what I may have missed or what you guys would love to hear about and talk about with your deck ideas or your card synergies that I did not mention. Oh, excuse me. This is our second to last commander for the Champions of Kamigawa set. So we only got 2 more videos for this entire set, including the oh, excuse me, including the set review. I'm gonna have a glass of water here. So, yeah, crazy stuff coming up. This has been a long set for me to work through. There's been a lot of commanders to talk about, but we're almost done. And as soon as we get on with these 2 videos, we'll be then moving into the unhinged set, which is, as it sounds, it's unhinged. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for all your support. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!